I saw some movies around Vietnam, but those came out years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only war movie that I've actually sat down and watched in the last several years was Saving Private Ryan, which came out, I don't know how many years ago it was.
I don't know,
and that was very hard. But I was actually able to sit through that movie and watch it without, quote unquote, freaking out. I'm using that in the metaphorical sense, not the literal sense.
Sure. Well, good. You answered one question was, is there a way to reverse PTSD? So you can reverse it.
Well, no, it's a matter of reversing. It's a matter of just healing. It has to do with healing. Okay. So I think reversing is I don't know. I wouldn't use that word.
Well, maybe
but
that's
the
not
answer
a good word.
But the answer is yes.
But,
an individual can be healed. One of the things that I will say this for the Veterans Administration, which can oftentimes have an adversarial relationship with veterans. That's sad but true. I'm talking about the bureaucracy, not the people that work at the VA. There's many good people. But the one area where the VA has been in the forefront is with post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of the things that they discovered is that teenagers or children that are exposed to traumatic situations like this, that their brain, physiologically, their brains do not develop in the same way. That the area of the brain that produces serotonin and some of the other, I don't think they're hormones, but the neurotransmitters that produce serotonin and I believe dopamine is one, that literally because the brain does not develop in the same way, that it doesn't have the same capability of developing that, which was something that actually shocked me. That they discovered that it's not just an emotional reaction, but that it literally can change physiologically the individual's brain, which helps keep us on an even keel. Okay, and so in terms of depression, people that have been through prolonged abuse or through combat at a younger age are much more prone to depression because physiologically they're not producing the same chemicals as other quote-unquote normal or average people are. Yeah, and that was quite shocking to me to learn that. Because
that was one of my next questions is how does it affect the nervous system or the brain? So
I wish I had the actual, and they told me, the specific part of the brain that is affected, and I wish I could give that out to whoever may be listening to this, but I don't. But I don't have that right now. But that is one of the things that the VA discovered themselves.
Interesting.
Any other questions? I'm open to any questions. Are there?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to say something. I thought I
no.
heard so I was waiting for a question. So is there such a thing as flashbacks?
Oh, yeah,
Have you
absolutely.
ever experienced a quote-unquote flashback?
Oh, yeah,
and what
I do. But, not for a long... Fortunately, again, as I went through groups and support groups and actually was able to help counsel, the numbers of flashbacks were greatly reduced. Some of the things, for me, one of the biggest triggers for flashbacks is smell, olfactory. I hope that nobody ever has to smell burning flesh, but it has a very, very distinct odor and aroma.
Yeah.
So there have been a couple of times in my life where and I have smelled something that was similar to burning flesh, and it takes me visually back immediately to that particular experience that I had in Vietnam. Now, in some of the most extreme cases of post-traumatic stress disorder, some people actually literally believe that they're back in that place, wherever it may be, whether it's Vietnam or Afghanistan or Iraq. But that's at the most, at least to my understanding, is at the most extreme end of the scale. I have had many vet friends who saw, extensive combat, and don't know any of them that actually literally went back to Vietnam, thought they were in Vietnam, but that is a reality for some people. And I think that's one of the misconceptions, because that's what's portrayed on TV, is that...
Exactly. I was going to say that's one of the Hollywood things, is they always have Vietnam vets or vets in general, walking the streets, and all of a sudden they imagine that they're back in war, and they freak out, and
right.
Thank you, Hollywood.
Well, on that scale of 1 to 10, those individuals would be at a 10, at a 9 or a 10. So but that is really not that common. Again, the vast majority of individuals that have post-traumatic stress disorder aren't even aware that they have it, or they call it something else. They just call it depression or something else. Whatever it is that you may call it, I wish people had access to health care universally, but especially if you're a veteran, go to a vet center and get into a group. I would plead to any brothers and sisters out there to please avail yourself of the services the VA has. For any women that have been, or men for that matter, that have been the victims of sexual abuse or been in a battered relationship, to please seek out and get into a group to help understand the dynamic of what's going on inside. Because oftentimes we can't, if fix is the right word, but I choose heal, we can't heal what it is that we're not aware of that actually may need healing. Because a lot of people say, well, that was then and this is now, and you just move on. Well, that's why I gave that quote about grief being buried alive in inner space, is because, see, I'll try to say this a little bit more delicately, but we had, this saying in the rap groups that you can't fit 100 gallons of crap in a 55-gallon drum. Eventually, that's going to start leaking out. And it may leak out with ending relationships. It may leak out in substance abuse. It may leak out in sex addiction. It may leak out in becoming a workaholic. There's a lot of different ways it can leak out, but it still leaks out. So even for folks that think they're actually on top of it, they're probably not on top of it nearly as much as they think. Go ahead.
Change the subject. Still same topic, but for kids, I've read that some of the symptoms they experience or they not experience, but they show outwardly in a cry for help would be symptoms of, being separated from a parent. It causes great fear. Losing skills such as toilet training, sleep problems, nightmares without any real content. The children can be somber, and during playtime they can reenact the experience. Phobias and anxiety, such as the fear of monsters in smaller kids, can surface.
Anger and aggression. And aggression.
Irritability and aggression. And then what would you recommend to those parents
you could be describing almost any child. So one of the things with you, it's the area that I know the least amount. I am absolutely not in any way, shape, or form any kind of an expert on PTSD in children.
On children.
And that's something because they're all, that's just a completely different dynamic. Again, the age that the individual is when they're exposed to the traumatic event has a lot to do with how severe that is going to, that individual is going to react to that event.
Sure.
Again, I think the average age of a World War II vet was, I believe it was, it's either 26 or 28, but it was somewhere in the mid-20s. But certainly a 26-year-old or 28-year-old individual has much more sense of self than a 17, 18, 19-year-old individual does. So their ability to cope and to process is much greater than somebody who's 19. Now, if you have a child, you know, I've actually known children or knew a child that watched his father kill his mother in front of him. And that particular child acted out with extreme aggression and hostility towards other kids. And also like to abuse animals. But, you know, the anger was there. Now, is every child different? I mean, you know, some people say tomato and other people say tomato, and it's the same thing with grief. And I can't stress enough for anybody that might listen to this that everybody's reaction is individual based on the person. So just because one person may be completely freaked out and, you know, having flashbacks, and another person may show absolutely no signs at all of anything. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person who's having the flashbacks is, you know, at a 10, and the person who's just quiet and saying nothing is at, on this imaginary PTSD scale we have, is at a 3, because that person who was sitting quiet may actually be at an 8, even though it's not showing outwardly. But with regards to children and PTSD, I'm not informed enough to offer any kind of insight into that at all.
Sure. So through your experiences and, you know, maybe speaking with friends or, you know, fellow vets, do you recommend any medications? Are there any out there that may be better than another that maybe work?
Well, I you know, again, this is an individual thing, and I would absolutely not make any kind of recommendations along those lines. I know veterans whose lives were saved from using different antidepressants. I also know other vets who, you know, and I say that quite literally when I say their lives were saved by using that. But for me personally, I chose to not use I did try antidepressants for a while, and I had one that I was using Paxil when it first came out, and it actually really did help. I had like areas of my brain that seemed to be opened up at feelings that I hadn't experienced since I was a child. I'm talking about good feelings now, happy feelings. But for me individually, I remember one day you're supposed to take one a day, and I not on purpose forgot to take my dose of Paxil, and I actually got very, very jittery. It almost felt like electric shocks were going through my body. So I chose to, with the guidance of a doctor, to, you know, take myself off, because you do not ever just stop taking antidepressants. It's very, very dangerous. You know, you do this with a doctor. So, yes, they can be very helpful. It depends upon the individual. But because it is an individual, every person is different, I would not recommend. The one thing that I know that helps is counseling and therapy and groups.
Okay. So you recommend probably, I mean, I know you're not a doctor or whatever, but just in the experiences that you've witnessed, you know, through the vet groups and centers and maybe, you know, hearing others talk, have they received more help through therapy and group than like actually a doctor, or is it kind of a combination of both?
Well, I don't know if I've actually seen enough to make any kind of absolute statements on that, but I would say from what I've seen that therapy has been the most effective thing, because people that, or individuals